on. You're
We're
on.
live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts. But today we are continuing Dane's birthday picks as we continue into some territory where lynching is concerned. So, Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about what movie we have in store for the audience tonight?
Yes, well, thank you. We got a David Lynch. We got a David Lynch film from 1997, and it is one of his most underrated films. I think one that not a lot of people have seen, and I think a lot of them don't necessarily appreciate it. It's Lost Highway, starring Bill Pullman and Patricia Arquette, who I love, and it's got Balthazar Getty and the last film role for Robert Blake prior to his accusation of murder of his former wife and his acquittal. But he hasn't acted in a movie since then. And of course, Robert Loggia is in this as well. He plays the main bad guy, Mr. Eddie. And yeah, this film was not a critical or commercial success. It was pretty widely panned at the time, but it has gotten some critical reappraisement along with most of his other catalog, which also was not very well understood in its time and has since gotten reappraised. This film was the first David Lynch film I ever saw, and I saw it when I was in high school.
What a way to start.
I know.
Yeah, wow.
It did not make full sense to me at the time, but it left an indelible impression on me. And I quickly understood that it was the kind of movie that one could not judge by conventional film standards. And partially the appeal of it was that you had to kind of let the experience of the movie wash over you and allow the artist to take you on a very particular ride that he intended for you to go on. And you know, I think that was an important lesson for me. What initially attracted me to the movie was the soundtrack. You know, because there are a lot of artists I was getting into at the time, like Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson and Rammstein and the Smashing Pumpkins. You know, a lot of those '90s alternative / metal icons are on here, and that's kind of what attracted me to it. But then the movie itself was, yeah, it took me to another place, and I've never stopped loving it. But it's a movie that there's a lot of layers to it, and we will definitely dive into that as we go. And there's a very particular backstory to the movie that I think once you know it, it helps the rest of it make sense. But before we do that, let us dive into first impressions. Tammy, was this a first time watch for you?
No, actually, it wasn't the first time. My best friend was totally into this movie. He's like, "You got to see this. You got to see it." We actually rented the VHS from Blockbuster.
Nice.
That was my first time watching it. Honestly, the first time I watched it, I really didn't get it, but he was all into it. So after rewatching it, I kind of get it a little bit more, but it is somewhat confusing.
Yeah. It's I mean, I think around this period, if not a little bit before, but especially around this period, David Lynch, his films tended to be more confusing than they already were. Because like you saw this progression continue with Mulholland Drive and especially with Inland Empire, which Inland Empire, I think out of all his work, that one makes the least sense. Partially because he didn't really know where it was going when he was making it. But Kroll, was this a first time watch for you?
Yes, it was the first time watch. Actually, hadn't even heard of it. And I don't think I've seen a David Lynch movie, so it was my first David Lynch too. Then,
Wow.
And I'm going to tell you my impression of it when I finished watching it. My thoughts were, what the hell did I just watch? Like, I didn't hate it.
That's the usual reaction.
I didn't exactly like it. I just didn't know what I watched. Like, you know, at first I was like, watching it, and it seemed a little weird. Like, the sex scene was really cool, but he looked really like depressed, like right after sex. I'm like, who the hell is like, you know, he looks haunted, more like you know, like it was just really weird, you know, which I thought was odd, and I wrote that down as a point. So I wanted to bring that up.
Well,
yeah, just don't let this color your impression of other David Lynch movies, because they're
Right.
they're.
Yeah, I do remember, you know, when I saw Pulp Fiction, I was pretty much the same way. Like, what did I watch? Like, those few one-liners, but I didn't get it. I've seen that movie now 3 or 4 times, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And so I get that sometimes you have to watch a movie more than once. Yeah,
For sure.
So I definitely, this one is definitely like, I'm like, I just don't get it. Like, I don't get it. Like, I was trying to understand what was going on. This one I thought maybe I might have grasped something. Nope.
Well, we will dive into that a little bit more as we go. I know that Brandon felt similarly, correct?
Oh, yeah, but that's I say that for most David Lynch films. There are a few exceptions to that rule. Now, I will say that this is not my first David Lynch film, but this is my first time watching this. I mean, I've watched Eraserhead. I've watched, let's see, Twin Peaks was him too, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive. I've watched a lot of his stuff.
The Elephant Man, which we looked at some time ago.
And some of them I get more than others on the first time, but every David Lynch film requires multiple viewings, especially the weird ones.
Right.
Which you could say all David Lynch films are the weird ones, but
except perhaps The Straight Story, but even that one.
So, you know, as far as that's concerned, no, I didn't understand what was going on. I got lost, and I just kind of like went with it and going, okay, I'll just let this thing wash over me, and I'll just not get it, because that's just how it's going to be. And so that was basically my impression of the film. Was I don't get it, but I'll watch it.
So you got lost on the Lost Highway.
Oh, I got very lost on that highway.
Yeah, which I do think that is partially by design, but again, I do argue that there's, I think, a fairly clear plot to this, but I will get to that in a bit.
Now, if you were to say it's a
Skeleton of
fairly
something
clear
there.
plot that you can easily get on the very first viewing,
Yeah, maybe
then
not
I
on the
would
very,
argue against that.
yeah, not on the very first viewing necessarily, but again, we'll get there. Mo, what about you?
This was, I think, my second time seeing this movie. I think, like a lot of people that get into David Lynch, you find out about him and you're like, oh shit, I gotta watch a bunch of this stuff. And so that's what I did. And Lost Highway didn't leave much of an impression. It left slightly more of one now than it would have at that time, because this was like high school. So I was, you know, my sensibilities when it comes to films and shit were not as developed as they are obviously many, many years later now. But I mean, okay, I'm kind of in the Krull camp on this. I didn't hate it. I didn't even dislike it, but I didn't even really like it. Like, it seems like quality wank material for other filmmakers. You know what I mean? And there's definitely, I think I got maybe more of the plot than some of these guys, I think. Because, I mean, I kind of loosely was following what the hell was supposed to be going on, I think. But it really is just the skeleton of, like, an idea inside of a bunch of really, really well-done filmmaking and visual stuff and use of music. It's got, like, all the elements of a really good movie there. And he was just like, look at this. You know, isn't this cool? Imagine if it had like an actual script. Like that's what I think is kind of what Lost Highway maybe was for him. Like, look at this. This is amazingly visually striking. But
I think that description there is probably even more accurate for Inland Empire, just because again he didn't really have much of an idea of where that was going to go as he was making it, and neither did the actors either. So that one is probably that one's one of his worst, I think, but it's very directionless. But like this was around that period where he was deliberately being very loose and very vague, even more so than
this
before.
is his I'm such a weirdo. Period. You know what I mean? Like, it is a bit try hard at the weirdness in stages during that time. And I mean, this in its defense does have a very loose, like I said, like idea of a coherent story that's threads it together in a sense. You know, I think I predicted the ending a little bit by certain things about midway through the movie. It was like, I kind of think I see where this might be going. He didn't define it very well. So it's, I don't know if it was all the weed I had in me and how focused I was on watching it at the time. But I was like, okay. Mr. Eddie fucking rules, though.
Oh, he does.
Out of it without that being in your first impression.
I've never tried watching David Lynch stoned, but I wonder if that wouldn't be the way to do it because of the weird, the weird random connections that your brain makes under, that probably works brilliantly with Lynch films.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, the Jake, was this? I assume this was a first-time watch.
This was a first and second time watch, and I'll get back to that in a moment. I do agree. Well, first of all, Mo, his weird period. He had a weird period.
It went off the rails a little bit.
It wasn't like
all of David Lynch was a weird period.
They're all weird, but they're, and they might leave you scratching your head at moments, but they're at least like coherently, for the most part, a thing that you can
he had a flirtation with the mainstream with like The Elephant Man, Blue Velvet a little bit, Twin Peaks a little bit.
I'm not sure I'd call Blue Velvet mainstream, but
mainstream is David Lynch's
a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit.
It is more accessible than this, I will admit. I've seen quite a few of his films, of course. We did discuss. Didn't we do Elephant Man for your last birthday?
Yep.
Yes, we did.
And we did Eraserhead before that. So.
Oh, I missed that discussion, and I do need to see that.
I missed that too.
I know Brandon and I started watching Eraserhead once, and I think we watched 5 minutes before we got distracted or did something else. I need to see that one. I've never seen Dune.
Eraserhead is my favorite Lynch film.
Yeah,
I love it.
Fantastic.
That's one I would almost recommend you don't be under the influence when you see it. The movie will make you fucking feel like you've taken drugs.
Yeah, really.
Again, and you recall at the start of the month, I had read that description where someone had called Jan Svankmeyer's Alice Eraserhead for children, and I just absolutely love that description. But I've yet to see that one or Dune or the Twin Peaks series or Inland Empire. This was one of the ones of the remaining ones to see. It was the one I wanted to see the most, and it's been on my radar for some time. I've owned a copy for a few months. I just haven't gotten to it, but I finally got to it. And yes, I will fully agree. I think I've seen every one of his films I've seen, with the probable exception of The Straight Story, which again is pretty straightforward. I think I've seen each of them 2 or more times. And yes, you do get more on repeat viewing. You really do. Even with The Elephant Man, you get more on repeat viewing. You never get the full package on the first viewing. And that's typical for his films. And actually, I wish I had more time to do this sort of approach. When I saw Mulholland Drive, I went to the theater and saw it and walked out the theater, walked out the theater going, what the hell did I just watch? Yeah. And I enjoyed it, but I was like, what the hell did I watch? And then I rented it along with the brilliant Bosnian war flick No Man's Land. And I sat down and I watched Mulholland Drive. I watched No Man's Land, and then I came back and watched Mulholland Drive again. And on the third time, I got it. I got it. It clicked for me on the third viewing. And I think that's probably not a bad way to do it if you have the time, With this one, though, it was more by accident than design that I saw it twice, because the first time, quite frankly, I was very, very tired. and I wasn't really in the right headspace to watch a David Lynch film. I just had to get it done. And I'll be honest, Dan, I slept through half the movie. But in a sense, that was a good thing because I saw enough of it that when I was able to go back alert and watch it again, that probably helped a lot with that viewing. So I wasn't coming to it blind. My initial impression is that the film is weird as hell. It is one of his weirdest films, like maybe even more so than Wild at Heart, I think. And that one I thought was pretty freaking weird.
I like Wild at Heart a lot. I call that
Right.
his I call that David Lynch's Raising Arizona.
Well, I mean, it's a
Pretty
Nick
much.
Cage movie. I mean, it's like, you know, he throws together the elements of several Nick Cage movies all together with probably the creepiest performance I've ever seen from Willem Dafoe.
It's up there, that's for sure.
And but anyway, this one, you got Robert Blake was pretty creepy, as you can tell from that picture I've got up.
Yeah.
It had its moments. It had its good. It had its bad. It had its ugly. I was a little bit nonplussed by the.
That's a good word.
By the final screen performance of Richard Pryor. I was.
Yeah, he's a little phoned in there.
It
Well,
felt
I
like he
mean,
was in there just to mumble weird shit because it'd be weird in a David Lynch movie. It
But-
didn't
Well,
feel like...
I think
know
he had
was-
health problems at the time.
He had severe health problems. He's had MS for many years before this, and it had accelerated to the point where he was having some trouble with, I think, with the enunciating and that's why he's in the wheelchair in the first place.
Yeah.
I do wonder about how that came to be. If he really wanted to be in a David Lynch film, or David Lynch really wanted to work with him, or if it was just Lynch thought, well, that would be weird, let's put him in there. It almost comes off as exploitive, and I had issues with it.
Like, I hope that it was Richard was just psyched to
I like Richard Pryor a lot.
Great.
And it was cool seeing him in a David Lynch film. It's cool knowing that exists. It's just it felt awkward. And of course, finding out that Robert Blake, this was his final film role, because as you said, Dane, he was accused of much the same as the main character was. And then just to add to the weirdness, the idea of Gary Busey playing a perfectly normal, straightforward role.
Yeah. Isn't that great?
Which is great. I love it.
Yeah, I was
the film. What's that?
So I was pretty much thinking the same thing when someone like, "Oh, Gary Busey," and then I'm like, "Wow, he's not like flipping out or freaking out or anything."
Yeah,
well,
I think that's kind
of they have him walk in like a leather jacket and the shades, and he looks like he might be kind of badass, but then they're driving like the wood-paneled station wagon, and they're just normal.
Yeah.
Right, he's like just a normal suburban dad. I mean,
but isn't that great?
I do have to say,
brilliant. Just cast him totally against type.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Really shows his
but that was one of the ways where the film. It was one of the ways where I went into this film under, I think, false expectations, and I won't say disappointed so much as surprised. Like, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about the plot, and I didn't really bother to find out. I was thinking this was going to be like a road movie or something, Lost Highway.
Surprising lack of highway in it.
It's surprising lack of highway, exactly. It was not at all, other than the sheer weirdness. It was not at all what I expected going in. And so that was one of the reasons why I'm glad I got a chance to do that second viewing to reset my expectations. And on the second viewing, I will say, I don't pretend to, quote, get the movie yet. I'm curious to hear your explanation, Dane.
Yes.
But I do think that it's a very interesting movie. David Lynch is he is a visionary director. You know it's David Lynch behind the camera when you're watching one of his movies. And I mean that in a good way, mostly.
Yeah.
I just think he may have been getting a little too far down that rabbit hole with this.
Which
Or
not
up his
which
own
it-
ass, as some people would,
yeah.
word
Well,
it.
Tarantino said that about him when he
Yeah.
saw Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me.
That was a weird as hell movie. I have not
Yeah.
seen the series, but I have seen Fire Walk with Me. And without seeing the series, it's a hot mess. But it's a glorious
Well,
hot
but-
mess.
Indeed.
Inland Empire is even more of a mess, and it also doesn't look very good because it's standard def digital
Oh.
cameras and everything. But it was an experiment for him. I mean, technically, all of
That's
his
too bad.
movies are somewhat.
And that's
Right.
not something that could be said about this. So I
Yeah,
wasn't
this is a
meaning that
good look at
necessarily in a derogatory way when I said it's mostly like wank material for other filmmakers, because it is nicely shot. There's times where you're like, I have no fucking idea what this is supposed to be right here, but it's put together beautifully.
One glaring exception though, that concert scene right at the beginning, where Bill Pullman's wailing on the sax, which
Yeah.
is pretty cool. But I swear, if anyone watching that who's prone to seizures,
Oh,
boy,
I know.
I
Yeah,
think he's just trying to
right.
get them out of the way right out the gate.
which that's
It's
that
something.
piece of music on the soundtrack is called Red Bats with Teeth by Angelo Badalamenti, and that's such a great piece of music. It starts off as just a conventional jazz session, and then it just goes off the rails, and it's like that's awesome.
Evolves into
That-
insanity, yeah.
I love the name.
Dave hasn't done his impressions yet.
No, I have not.
Go for it.
you're doing
My-
impressions, Dave?
First impressions, which this could be awkward.
Do Bugs Bunny.
Just anyways. So my first impression of this film is I watched this back once with a buddy of mine who used to be a roommate of mine. We were kind of under the influence, and I didn't understand. I was the same way as you, Kroll, and I was the same way as you, Septum. The first time. The second time was a time with Tammy. And I think it was a time where I wasn't really paying attention to it, but I did get one thing out of it. Marilyn Manson, did I put a spell on you? And I had to look that up.
Yeah.
So I got that from it, but this time around, I was actually watching it, and to me, I take it as more of a neo-noir mystery kind of a thing. And the fact that there were twin women, and it kind of goes to the fact that Twin Peaks, but I took Patricia Arquette's characters as being Betty Page and Marilyn Monroe, in a sense.
Well, their hairstyles are definitely inspired by Betty Page, and I want to say Jane Mansfield actually for Alice,
Right.
but you're on the right track there. But
I really think that you kind of have to get the whole story in not one turn, not two turns, in like three turns, because then it's like you gotta pick what happens, and you could take this as a story about a man with a mental health issue that may have multiple personalities, or the fact that this person is more of a chameleon, and he can be a different person anytime he wants to be one. So,
well, you're getting warmer, I think. So, I've been teasing this the whole time. So here was David Lynch's inspiration for this story. It was something that he and the co-writer was Barry Gifford. It was something that they'd been teasing back and forth with each other for a little while, for a few years. And so 3 years prior to this film coming out, the O.J. Simpson case happened. And what was that? It was a famous man accused of murdering his wife and that sort of thing. And they, on top of, most of a lot of America at the time, thought he did it, so they were in that camp. But what it was it was David Lynch and his writer. They were trying to figure out, what is this Lost Highway thing? What can we do with this? And with O.J. Simpson, David Lynch got the idea of essentially what are the mental gymnastics that one would go through in order to kill one's wife. And, what would that do to a person's psyche? What would that even look like? And what's funny is that a lot of what has come out since then, like with the If I Did It book, where OJ presents hypothetically what happened that night, and he talks about the person Charlie, that helped him and all that stuff. You realize that a lot of David Lynch's instincts were pretty spot on as far as like someone disassociating from oneself and having this other self and that sort of thing. So we find out that some of those instincts were pretty spot on. But so I think it is. So it essentially the story is largely inspired
I feel like the
Simpson
mystery man is kind of like his subconscious.
Well, you can definitely read it that way. So here's the thing. So I think I think that using that as the starting point of like what are the mental gymnastics that one has to go through in order to murder one's spouse. That's a good starting point. But then there's a lot more to it than that, because what you find is you see someone, Fred, who's our protagonist. He's, someone who's skilled in his field as a jazz, saxophonist, and he has a beautiful wife, obviously a nice house in Los Angeles. But it's kind of a dull, very secluded life where his romance is there's no romance there. They have very kind of passionless sex. He fears that she might be cheating on him, and that sort of thing. You've got that, but then you've got this other person, this other self, Pete, and you've got a world that's full of sex and sleaze and gangsters and excitement and that noir mystery that Dave was talking about. So it's kind of the polar opposite of Fred's life, where it's full of like pulp fiction-y drama, and he's sleeping with the big man's girl and that kind of stuff. It's the total opposite of Fred's life. So ostensibly what you've got there is you've got someone who is so consumed by jealousy and paranoia that evil itself, represented by the mystery man, can come into his life and can kind of have these that's kind of a representation of evil itself that comes into his life and into his heart, and drives him down that path of
Exactly.
murder.
Like all the shit that he imagines in this other life is the stuff he probably imagines is going on around his whole dull life in this jazz club scene with all these people, and it's just they fill it with so much wankery and drawn out crap that, like, if the movie was 45 minutes trimmed, it would probably be a little more coherent for people watching it the first time. But I pretty much picked up on all of that, and the whole transformation kind of happens when he's in prison to this other life, and then it kind of circles back around to when he ends up.
I would say
I got lost after the prison scene. I was catching it up, but once I got there and it switched to the other life, then I went, "What? Where?
Well,
Yeah.
here's kind of here's the interesting thing. So with O.J. Simpson, if you've read If I Did It, and I'm just going based on the assumption that I'm gonna just say right now, I think that was more than hypothetical. I think that is what happened.
Oh, I think you did it.
But here's what's interesting about that, though: the fact that he presents it as a hypothetical and the way that he frames that part of the story by kind of disassociating himself, good guy OJ, from this other guy Charlie. The description of the events as they unfold is such that it seems like he had kind of a dissociative episode, and that he, in the aftermath of it, sort of sequesters off this part of himself into this other character, this other being. And that's
Yeah,
where
I
the
don't
whole
think he ever
that's where
leaves the jail cell.
yeah, well, that's what,
Initially.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I think OJ did that, at least according to his description in the book, and I think that Fred does that here as well. That it's what happened is so repulsive to him that he does shut it out of his conscious mind and puts it into this other character, this other person who is younger,
was forced into this situation.
Yeah,
these fucking sleazy
I think-
people.
Right.
I think
and his girl is a funhouse mirror image of his girl in his other life, but Pete is like this younger, sexier man, whereas Bill Pullman's a little bit older than that.
And yeah,
I think this is
notably-
where, Tammy, I think this is where you should interject what that phrase that you took.
Yeah.
Tammy.
I'm not sure which one you're talking about. I'm sorry.
Something about the time ahead, or I remember you saying something that it should be good to remember for this discussion.
It would have been good if I remembered it.
Right.
Well,
while you're thinking,
you're saying something.
well, I was going to say, while you're thinking about it, I think it is worth noting that the guy that he suspects his wife of cheating with him is the same in both versions.
Yes.
And so when he does the killing of the guy, or Pete kills the guy, I guess that would fit with the idea of it being a fantasy that he would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that was a pretty brutal scene, I have to admit.
And the way it's all done, we don't know that he didn't do it, and that was just him disassociating and like coming up with this scenario where he was forced into doing it.
Yeah. Well, honestly, here's what I think happened. I think that what really literally happened is, I think Fred found out that, so the events where he heads to the Lost Highway and he beats Mr. Eddie up and everything, I think chronologically what happens is he finds out that his wife Renee was with Mr. Eddie. He tracks him down, beats him up, kills him, and then he kills his wife, and then is so repulsed by the whole thing that he dissociates and creates this whole other existence. I think that's literally what happened. But
exactly, I think he was arrested for it, and I think everything in the movie past him getting thrown in the jail cell and complaining about his head is like in this whole alternate reality he's invented in his head.
Because there isn't that they end with the beginning, and that way of describing it makes sense, because when he goes to the hotel, there's no clear indication of chronology relative to the rest of the story that I caught. But it does make sense that maybe that they did go back, that it was a flashback sequence. Because that makes the final scene make more sense, I guess you might say, in the scheme of things. And I thought it was interesting that I read that Lynch claims that he got that exact page once, that he woke up to someone simply saying Dick Laurent is dead, and he had no idea what that came from or what it was supposed to mean.
I believe you're right. Now, structurally, this movie deliberately flies in the face of conventional film structure, and in fact, a lot of critics have called it similar to a Mobius strip. Which is it's meant to kind of curve back around, but different points intersect before they curve back around and meet again in the middle.
Exactly.
And I think there were certain things that were left unsaid about his wife's past, like her friend Andy and whatnot, which kind of have something to do with her past, with her being a lady of the night.
Yeah.
Well, I go back to what I said at the beginning. Like, I feel like the movie is more of a general experiment in filmmaking based around a loose idea that these guys had. And even with it being in the state that it is, if you trimmed out some of like them indulging the filmmakery side of what they wanted to do and trimmed like 45 minutes off of it and just made everything happen closer together, you still, I think, would get more from the movie in like a first or second viewing, and you wouldn't need to revisit it.
I would say Mo, I don't know about 45 minutes, but based on what I've seen of all the Lynch films I've seen, he definitely has certain predilections, like the lingering on phones ringing and the long drawn out scenes.
There's a part where they took a crane shot of that motherfucking kid sitting in his backyard in a lawn chair and then watched him walk over and stare at a sailboat and a camper.
Right.
It took like 3 minutes.
Like I said, if you take out the more Lynchian aspects of his filmmaking style, and it'd be kind of like if you take slow motion sequences out of a Zack Snyder film or something like that. Like if you take out certain things that are in every Lynch film, or say like the editors or the producers said, "Look, man, you gotta trim this down."
Yeah.
I would say without exception, the films would be 10 minutes shorter.
Yeah,
but they would probably be.
They wouldn't be a Lynch film.
It wouldn't be. Yeah, you're right. It would destroy. It would change the vibe. I don't know if I would say destroy.
It
would change the vibe.
Well, like
you don't even have to take all of it out. Just some of the more gratuitous stuff, maybe.
Well, I could have said the same thing about like most of like Tarantino's later work. If you were to like I'm thinking like The Hateful Eight and especially Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if you were to whittle those down to just the plot important elements or just the plot important scenes, you could probably get like a half-hour short film.
If you cut out the foot fetish stuff, you cut out 5 minutes of each movie.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. This doesn't even need that much taken off of it. Just some of those scenes. Like, okay, that was a cool crane scene, but then maybe, David, we sacrifice that for the crane shot of the front of the fucking automotive place. Like, do we need all these shots that take a solid 90 seconds minimum to even complete? If you whittled all even half of the shit out of this movie with that, and some of the more pointless like lingering scenes.
But that's part of
a good example is when Gary Busey and his wife first walk into like that office, and it just sits there on him for like a solid 15 seconds longer than it needs to.
Well, that's partially because again, it's part of the Lynchian magic. He wants you to get sucked into the mood he's creating and all that stuff. And
he's huffing his farts on some of these shots, but that's
I wouldn't doubt that that's a thing he does on his days off.
Yeah, which again, I could easily. I know that Tarantino basically said the same thing about him, like around the time of Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, but I could easily say the same about Tarantino himself in his later period work also. So he's not the only one who does that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to listen to the Cranberries at any point in time.
I think so basically I think one of the key points with this film, I think, is understanding that storytelling structure and some of those basic inspirations, because then you understand the degrees of differentiation between thread and Pete, and also the points of intersection, because as Pete's story, as it progresses, more elements of Renee creep into Alice, and you kind of get the sense that, okay, Renee probably had a history with pornography and with crime, and that's how she probably knew Mr. Eddie and knew Andy and knew all these other people. and it's these other elements
Yeah.
from his real life that are creeping back into this fantasy world. You know,
They both
creepy-
both
go
of
ahead,
them,
Jake.
Alice and Renee, do make that comment about
we met at a
meeting.
place called Noakes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so one of the other important themes in this film, and they're kind of intrinsically tied to the mystery man, who I love the fact that he's not named, and I don't know, and I have to address the irony. So this was inspired by the O.J. Simpson case, famous murder trial where he got acquitted but lost in civil court. This film stars Robert Blake, who years later was accused of murdering his wife, got acquitted in criminal court, and lost in civil court, and got his life ruined. So it's like, oh, geez, the cycle repeats. So the irony there is stunning.
That is pretty wild.
But I'll say this, so I don't know if he did or didn't do it. I certainly hope he didn't, but Robert Blake, I mean.
Well, even more crazy, because wasn't he one of the Little Rascals?
He was, and
it's like, wow.
Yeah, well, but here's the thing. So, like, with Robert Blake, like, again, I don't know if he did or didn't do it, but I absolutely love his performance in here, and he gave one of the all-time best film performances ever in Cold Blood, which oh man, his performance in that is unreal. So I mean, I can't get enough of that. But like, the theme that I have to tie into this thing, because it is intrinsically linked with the mystery man and what he represents, which is kind of evil itself and the dark side of humanity and all that kind of stuff. But it's the idea of technology, specifically cell phones and video cameras especially, and their representations of reality versus what Fred says pretty early on, which is, Renee's like, Fred hates them, with video cameras. What do you mean by that? It's like, I like to remember things my own way. What do you mean by that? How I remembered them, not necessarily the way they happened. And
that was a cool way to put it.
Dead stares him like this.
Yeah.
Pretentious as fuck.
Well, but that's a pretty key, that's a pretty key phrase to introduce pretty early into the movie, because it says to us that not only is he a potentially unreliable narrator, unreliable protagonist, but also it's the idea that
he's not an accurate source necessarily.
That, and he likes to rely on
revise his own shit.
Yeah, his recollection of events, which he can cast himself as the good guy or as the victim or whatever. But then what does the mystery man do? He holds up the video camera and points it at him and is like, her name is Renee. If she says that her name is anything but Renee, she's lying. And what the fuck is your name? And so it's the idea that reality itself imposes on our perceptions of it.
I mean, he outright kind of tells you what's going on in the movie at the part where he's like, in Eastern cultures, when people are sentenced to death, they live in like a reality where it's basically constantly repeating, and they never know when the assassin's bullet's going to come. I took that as him basically explaining what the hell was going on. Like, this dude, in all likelihood, is going to rot in jail because he killed his fucking wife. And he's going to keep doing like these mental gymnastics, as you call it, this disassociative fantasy world shit over and over and over again, and creating all new realities with it. Like, we don't even know if what happened in this is even close to the real thing because of what you just said.
And I do like right after he says that, which is like just straight up, that's some pretty cold stuff to say to someone. Yeah. And then right after that, Mr. Eddie's like, I just wanted to jump on the line here and say, I hope you're doing really well.
Yeah,
I do have to jump in here and say that that Henry Rollins from the Henry Rollins band showed up here as a guard.
I was stoked on that. The way he's looking at that dude from behind too, when they're in that scene and they've got him in there getting like his head medicine, and Henry Rollins is just looking at his back. Like, I don't know that Henry. I think he might have been in on that. This was going to be weird. He had the foresight. Like, I don't know what I'm even fucking doing here. If this is going to be something I like or just don't understand.
I think at this point, most people would have suspected it would be a weird movie.
Well, I think at this point, the movie is more about how we remember it and less about what really happened.
Right.
Well, I think what's I like the fact that the mystery man's not in it that much, but every time he appears, you're like, oh shit, something really important is gonna happen here.
Well, you got that great scene where he meets Fred at the party, and he
Yeah,
hands him his phone. He's like, "I'm in your house right now.
I
Here,
know.
I'm on the line. I can talk to you." And he's like, gives him the phone, and he's talking to him and looking at him. And
Yes.
it's like, oh, that's some weird stuff. I don't know.
That scene, when I saw that scene, and again, I went into this movie blind at a pretty formative time in my life. I went into it blind, and I saw that scene. It messed with me, like, but in a really good way. I was like, that is scary. Just the thought of that happening to you in real life. Oh man, that would blow your mind. Um, but and again, the way he plays it, it's so unbelievably creepy, and the whole like white face that he has, all that stuff. That was actually, I think, Robert Blake himself came up with that idea for just the pale face and the hair and everything.
Made me wonder if he
well-
was one of the ghosts in The Shining or some shit like that.
I was getting ready to say he looks like someone who's probably a distant cousin of the Addams family. Like, there's a
Yeah,
little bit of a Fester look to him.
or like a German expressionist.
Right.
But like that whole scene to me, like that is kind of the movie in a nutshell, and everything he says in that scene is so packed with meaning, because he's like, we've met before, haven't we? No, I don't think so. Where was it you think we met? At your house, don't you remember? No, I don't. Are you sure? Of course. As a matter of fact, I'm there right now. What do you mean you're where right now? At your house. That's fucking crazy, man. And he calls him up and
Right.
Which makes me wonder if Ghostface actually took that from him.
Yeah. Well, no, Scream came before this, but but then what's the thing he says? It's like, how'd you do that? Ask me. How'd you get inside my house? You invited me. It is not my place to go where I'm not wanted. So clearly he was inviting the evil in.
So
at this
this could
juncture.
also be, we were just talking about this in the Dracula discussion, but it could be
Yeah.
the same sort of thing. You let the right one in.
Yeah.
No, you could
Yeah.
very easily look at this movie as super literally, like he's actually changed into that kid, and this dude is some type of like,
Right.
death vampire or something that follows. I mean,
Yeah, I was thinking he must be some kind of vampire first.
And then, of course, there's a very, 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 very similar reprise of that discussion later with Pete, and it's
Yes.
which was kind of interesting. Like, again, the first time I kind of faded out for much of that sequence, so I didn't see near as much of the repeating. But the second time I saw, like, each time they came back and hit something that had been hit before, and I was like, okay, it works better when you see both parts of it.
Yeah. Well, and what happens when something from Fred's life starts to intrude onto Pete's life? It's Pete's mental state starts to decline. He starts
like
to
when
get
that
a
song
headache.
plays.
Right.
This is basically what happens when you check out from something bad that you do.
Yeah, basically. But the unpleasant reality creeps back in. But that's what happens is he deteriorates and his mental state gets worse and everything. And what's interesting also is you compare Pete's life to Fred's, but you also compare Pete's life to something like Wild at Heart, because Pete's life is kind of similar to Wild at Heart, because that's about these two young people kind of on the run, getting into trouble, and some of the wacky, colorful
Kind of like a
characters
Bonnie
that
and
they meet.
Clyde kind of a thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of where Pete's story is gonna go. But again, the parallels to Renee and to Fred, they keep popping in, and eventually you see some of that overlap happening with the picture. And he's like, "Which one's you?" And she's like, "That's me." But we know that Renee is the real her.
Well, and if you wanted to like read even deeper into it, you could say the difference between Renee and Alice's life is pretty telling, or the similarities rather, and that they're both kind of like these bored trophy wife type people. And in his alternate reality of this whole thing, he's invented this much more exciting relationship with this kid and this secret and everything like that for her to hopefully be like still attached to, or like more attached to. And then he comes to that realization that in either reality he was not meant to have her, and she was gonna like leave him in one way regardless, kind of a thing. Because there's that whole scene where she says like, "You're never gonna have me," and then he turns back into Bill Pullman again. So there's a lot to be said about that element of the story as well. It leads you to believe that she probably got neglected by this weird depressed dude in his saxophone, and eventually legitimately like cheated on him for legitimate reasons. And he flipped out and fucking killed her, and then this whole thing is like
I think she was before she even met the saxophonist, she led a life of sexcapades for money, and then because of his jealous shit, she went back into the sexcapade shit, and Mr. Ed was just one of her Johns.
Yeah, more than likely.
We don't know that that's not his own, again, mental gymnastics situating it so that she was always going to be a slut and cheat on him, basically.
Yeah.
So it was destined to turn out the way it was, and he's trying to figure out a way to make it seem like better than it actually is.
Yeah. Well, and again, I point to If I Did It, because even in the parts of the book that are not hypothetical, which is most of it, it's just the one chapter, but even then, you see a very particularly colored version of events in which, OJ is seen as like this, very out and about, pleasant person, and that, Nicole just drive him crazy and, all that stuff. So it's painted in a very particular light, even like before and after. So, I mean, but that's what all of us do with all aspects of our life. We can only really know it from our perspectives.
Right.
Especially if those of us, if we were to do something that heinous or whatever, then, one might be tempted to create a version of events in which we were coerced into it, or we were, disassociated from it or whatever. I'm sure.
Right. I mean, because reality is everybody's viewpoint. It's like the Rashomon shit, everybody sees every situation in like different ways, right? So you tend to paint yourself in a more sympathetic light in a situation like that anyways. And then if you went ahead and killed the lady, you might, your natural mental instincts might be to exaggerate your innocent position in all this.
Exactly.
Right.
So, having this movie been explained this way, those of you who were confused, are you now unconfused?
It makes me want to watch it again. Though oddly enough, I have more of a craving to watch Quicksilver Highway or Riding the Bullet. I don't know why. But in reality, though, I know I would have to watch it again, and that's the point of a David Lynch film. Actually, of most David Lynch films, even the straightforward ones require multiple watches. This is why I'm watching Twin Peaks over again, very slowly, albeit, but I am watching it again to get a better grasp on it before I tackle that firewalk with me.
Yeah. Well, but what I like about his films in particular is that even if you don't understand each and everything right away, the ride that you're on is certainly memorable, and it's unlike anything anyone else could do. And that's a whole lot better than if it was just some bland, forgettable piece of shit that you don't
like
there are three ways. I was going to say there are three ways you could view a David Lynch film, but I'll let Jacob finish his point.
Well, I was just going to say an example was like the first time I did see Mulholland Drive, I may not have gotten the movie on the first go, But there were certain elements that I remembered from the get-go. There were certain elements that really clicked with me, certain moments that I thought were pretty hilarious. There are also just some of the imagery and whatever. And one thing that clicked with me from the get-go was, holy crap, who is this woman who starred in this movie? She is incredible. I still say Naomi Watts was robbed with that
She is
one.
incredible in that. Which
But
now, what's funny about this in comparison
Mhm.
to Mulholland Drive is it seems like people got Mulholland, at least critics seem to get Mulholland Drive a little bit more than this, even though this came first. But that movie also is about perceptions or
Right.
percepted reality versus the actual reality, because
Right.
there Naomi Watts is, this young actress looking for work in Hollywood, and it's very romanticized and all that stuff. And then then they go to some strange place with a strange person, and then we see the actual version of events in which things are not so rosy perfect, and our protagonist
Exactly.
is actually pretty despicable in a lot of
Well,
ways.
it was presented in a way that was digestible. Okay,
I
well,
guess
Right.
Yeah.
this is not that. There's
Well, that-
so much in here that just draws out the
Right.
ability to put any of that across. That it does take 3 watches and like a fucking flow chart or something to probably figure it out completely. And that's a little excessive, bro.
Well, and
Like,
Mulholland Drive is kind of deliberately structured in a part 1, then the middle linking portion, and then part 2, which part 2 is so it's like it is still relatively linear. This is deliberately like a Mobius strip, so it does
Right.
have
it's
a
like
lot of
part 3, part
Well,
1, part
it
negative
crisscrosses
0, then it comes back in.
it crisscrosses
Which
over itself.
So,
is one thing that I will give the film where it lives up to its title is you would expect a Lost Highway to not really have a definitive beginning or end.
Yes.
And as a film experiment, it's very interesting. As if you were to try to make this into a film that most people could watch and not be like, ugh.
Yeah, this is
not, you might need to trim some off of it.
This is not a most people movie. I will give you that.
No.
I do think what you said there with Lost Highway is not a beginning or an end. I think that's right on point. It ends as it begins on that Lost Highway, which this has one of the best opening credit sequences I think I've ever seen.
It really does.
I do like that song. It
gets
perfectly.
It gets you pumped up again. I'm a big fan
pumped up to wait for 40 minutes till something actually happens.
I really, really love movies that have great opening title sequences.
Yeah, it's a thing.
And this
James Bond probably did it to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, but this opening title sequence and the song that plays tells you a lot about it already, because again, it's a lost highway. It goes straight on to In the Darkness to No Beginning and No End, and then the song I'm Deranged by David Bowie from his industrial period. That tells us a lot already in and of itself.
It's great. It managed, again, I don't know if it was all the weed, but it did like center me for the movie. It was like,
and lyrically it matches up very well with the protagonist's state of mind. So it already gives us a lot of clues right off the bat. And then, you do see Fred as he's turning into Pete. He kind of stops off the Lost Highway onto a particular stop, that seems to be more exciting, more appropriate, more, alluring, and not as horrific as his current situation, so it does have a visual thematic component to it as well.
All right. I got to point this out because it's been bothering me the whole time, and I was really trying not to go in on it, but Bill Pullman's got like some little boy lips in the center of a man face, okay? and it always makes me uncomfortable. And then seeing him all moist-eyed in this movie, like having fucking embarrassing sex with Patricia Arquette, was just the breaking point for me. I was like, get the fucking lips out of there, man.
And by the way, this was actually the first time I think I ever saw Patricia Arquette in anything, and I loved her as Renee/Alice. I thought she was beautiful, but I thought she was very. She had a presence to her, and she had
She
a.
does. A lot of her nude in the movie too, and it
My
takes slow motion.
that didn't
biggest
hurt
problem
anything.
about this film was in the very beginning. The husband and wife dialogue was said so softly that I couldn't hear the dialogue.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was deliberately dull and deliberately flat, and
I just couldn't hear a thing they were saying to each other while they were standing there speaking to each other.
I'm sorry.
I just couldn't hear what they were saying to even get like involved in their love life and
none of it. Really
yeah, I know,
does, I guess still. On repeat viewings. But
I couldn't hear what he had said to himself on the intercom. You know, I was like, "What did he say? Someone's dead?" You know, like
I was able to hear that, but I will agree with what Dave and Mo are saying, and I think this is one of the reasons why I'm glad I had to revisit it right away. And it's one of the reasons why I had to revisit it right away, because I think it's one of the reasons that it put me to sleep by the time he was in prison. Was there really isn't much happening in that first bit, and it is good in some ways for setting up what comes after, but if you're going into this blind and you don't know what comes after, I imagine a lot of people are just completely put off by that first 40 minutes.
Dude,
or so.
Yes,
I've watched
some type of trolling.
I've watched this 3 times, and every time I keep picturing Beaker from the Muppets.
That'd been awesome.
And I'm sorry, but this is the dialogue.
Dude, just imagine the movie fucking with Beaker deep faked in. Imagine if it was different movie. Dude, imagine if it was Beaker deep faked in for Patricia Arquette through the entire movie.
Oh my god. That's
no, but
image.
Dude, it is boring as fucking sin at multiple parts, and the first part of it is definitely one of those sections where it's like, why is there like a 2-minute shot of this dude coming into his kitchen and then looking up through a skylight at the guy on his roof? Was that necessary? I mean, it's shot beautifully. I'll give him that.
What was that scene where he's in the hotel and he's looking up at the light and all those bugs are coming out and shit?
I kind of liked that, and I think they did.
I don't
like
understand
that
it. Like
it
didn't make
whatever
sense.
Song at that point.
I do.
I love that scene.
What about you, Tammy? Hearing all of these things, I haven't heard from you about Lost Highway in general. Hearing all of this, what are your thoughts on this film now?
Well, I understand it a little bit more because of what Dane said. So it makes it a little bit easier to understand. I don't think I really got it that much until he explained it more. So yeah. I honestly really didn't get into it too much because I couldn't understand it. But now that you explained it, and I think about the movie, I'm like, oh, okay, I get that now.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense now. One thing I will have to say is I don't like girls, okay? But I've seen Patricia Arquette and other things, and I've never seen her in the movie where she was naked. So I do have to say she is a very pretty lady, and I don't like girls, okay? I just thought she was very pretty.
Well,
she's got that body type you'd painted on the side of a B-52. You know what I mean?
Totally. The wigs they have her wearing here are very appropriate for that type of 40s pinup girl. Also, so I mean that's very appropriate. Which I mean, so
yeah,
part
man. I mean, again, that slow mo. If it wasn't for Bill Pullman's lips, that'd be like peak.
Well, but no, she was in great shape in this film, and again, she looks beautiful, and she looks beautiful naked.
So Mo, what do you find more disturbing, Bill Pullman's little boy lips or Robert Blake's sort of living corpse lips?
Honestly, dude, the little boy lips, and especially when he's got like stubble going on, it's just off-putting, and it has always done that to me in every Bill Pullman movie. And then here he's like, that's why you got to have that on Patricia Arquette right
That's funny.
there. His neck veins are popping out with his little boy lips right there. It's fucked up.
I'm never gonna not see that.
I actually don't disagree with that. I just don't know that I ever thought to put it that way.
Yeah, those are two images I never thought to associate with this thing, but I love them.
Bill Pullman is that type of guy you'd love to be your stepdad, but you don't want to ever see him kiss your mom. You know what I mean? It just makes it even weirder. It's like, dude, you should be my age with those lips. You're kissing my mom. Get the fuck out of the house.
Especially because I will always, I mean, we covered Spaceballs just a few months ago, but I will always associate him with Lone Star, and I can definitely see that being more the stepdad sort of character.
Now this, I'll say this, so like I had seen him in other things, like I saw him in like Sleepless in Seattle, Spaceballs, While You Were Sleeping, stuff like that.
Independence Day.
Independence Day.
That one too.
I had seen him in other movies prior to
this. Now I have to see Independence Day again with that thought.
Yeah.
He's great. He's a great actor.
Yeah, well, but I bring it up because I had seen him in other things, and he was always like that, pretty even keel supporting actor. He was always like the other. Well, but he was always like the other guy in romantic comedies. Like,
and you can understand why. I mean, no one's gonna get manhandled by those lips. Look at him.
Well, but what I loved about him in this movie is that he is the lead, and he is able to go into these darker territories and make you believe it. He kind of fills the role of like, if this was made a few years earlier, Kyle MacLachlan would have played this role. Yeah.
So what would have happened if they gave him that little pencil thin mustache Andy had? I mean, would that have?
I don't know if I could have dealt with that, dude.
Or a thick bushy one like Richard Pryor had.
That might actually help Bill. You know what I mean? When you got lips like that, you should call
or Yosemite Sam.
I like the fact that he got to show a different part of himself in a different kind of darker style of acting. I really like that.
I've noticed too. You motherfuckers are always choosing movies where people got moist eyes, like real maybe it's because you choose higher brow shit where there's like actual acting, but I don't think I've ever really suggested a moist-eyed movie yet where anyone's got like, look how moist that shit is. Bill Pullman's like shedding an actual tear right there.
Nice.
Well, and speaking of moist and speaking of eroticism, I think there's quite a lot of eroticism in this, which is again done very well.
It is, but there is a lot of it. Like,
well, some of it I like.
3 times my brother walked in when I was watching it. There was sex happening, and I'm pretty sure he thought I was just watching a sex film.
Now, imagine my conundrum of like being a teenager and like try to make sure I could watch this without my parents finding it and that kind of stuff.
Well, see, the first time I watched it, my brothers kept walking through, and I think they kept walking through when there was heavy cursing going on, which only happens a few times in the movie, but they seem to always pick those moments. It was weird.
And here's what I do, because I think, Mo, you're right. But then the part that I find really funny, though, is that they do kind of make fun of the fact that Pete really gets around, and they're like, what a fucking... It's like, this guy gets more pussy than a toilet seat.
That was the best line in the whole movie.
Well,
that's what he said. I missed it.
Yeah. Well, and then he's like, what a fucking job. His or ours, Lou? Ours, Hank.
Right. Speaking of his little entourage there, of course, he did have Sheila, who was his. It was his.
And she was pretty good looking too.
She was. But
this movie caused more than a few cases of hairy palms, I'm sure.
Right. It is notable that one of his entourage was a young Giovanni Ribisi.
Yeah.
In one of his early roles, and just to tie the two movies together a little bit. as much as I ragged on Keanu's performance in Dracula, a film that also I think is a underrated film for its particular director that featured Keanu and Giovanni Ribisi was Sam Raimi's The Gift, and that was actually one of the first films I saw with Keanu where I thought, wow, he did a good job.
I'm playing
And
the bad guy, yeah.
and in that one, he was playing an abusive boyfriend who ends up accused of murdering his girlfriend. And it's like, if I remember correctly, I think he straight up killed her or was accused of it at least. So there's an interesting similarity here thematically. But I just thought it was interesting that the two of them, they bring tonight's movies together in that one movie that had some thematic similarities with everything we've been looking at here.
Yeah.
And Robert Loggia also ties it into our discussion where we were talking about monstrous individuals that you just really like. Because Mr. Eddie is likable.
Yeah.
Monster.
He's an awful person, but he's so damn funny to watch.
Dude,
Like,
that part where
I
he
still
runs the guy
remember
down
him
for
from Big.
tailgating.
Yeah.
He's
yeah.
like, fuck, he messes him up.
So if I remember, that was kind of inspired by a real incident that Robert Loggia had with the tailgater, not like the beating up part, but I think like the yelling at him part.
And probably
I think,
scaring the shit out of him.
I'm
Yes,
gonna get that right out of the way. That is my favorite scene. That whole tailgater scene.
Down,
the
dude.
fact that
Tell me
he
you're
goes
gonna get
all
a manual.
mob.
yes.
The fact that he goes all mob on dude's ass just because he didn't read a manual.
No,
Yeah.
that's the part I like. It's like I commented, like this is like textbook lawful neutral, isn't? I mean, lawful evil, isn't it? Because it's like he's going medieval on him pretty much, but it's because he didn't follow the rules because because he couldn't read a manual, and it's
50,000 people die on the highway every year.
yeah,
assholes like you.
it's like
he's
educating
He's
while
all serious about it.
Well, he's like a Coen. He's like a Coen Brothers character.
I love that part. Exactly. I love that part afterwards where he's like, "I'm sorry, tailgating's
It's just one
not
thing I
something
cannot
can
tolerate."
Yeah,
Well,
I cannot tolerate it.
there are a lot of quotable lines in this, but one of them is actually on the soundtrack, which again we'll get to music, but like because the soundtrack has little pieces of dialogue and samples and stuff
Tammy,
in there.
Were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say the one thing that I thought was weird is in every movie I've seen where there's a character, like Mr. Eddie, is why was he driving? Usually the henchmen are the ones that do the driving.
He likes to drive, and well, that's actually where I was going with that. So the quote that was on the soundtrack, which I had a tendency, especially at that time, I had a tendency to listen to movie soundtracks before I saw the movie. And so if they had little bits of dialogue and stuff, I would get familiar with that. Then I would wait for them to show up in the movie. And the line that's on the soundtrack and in the film is, "This is where mechanical excellence and 1,400 horsepower pays off." And I'm like, how in the hell do you get 1,400 horsepower? But, if anybody could get it, it probably would.
It
probably would be Mr. Eddie. And
I love how the way they shoot
drive.
it when he like speeds up, it looks like an episode of Batman or something. Like
Yeah.
it goes all old school, like it's sped up. And he fucks that car up, dude. He pushes it around like 2 different corners while the car's like drifting in front of it.
Right.
Props to the stunt drivers during all that, because I thought for sure one of those cars was going off the edge of that cliff. And then he just rams it onto that embankment and pistol whips the shit out of the dude while giving him like a speech about driver safety. It's just amazing. One of the best scenes, I would say, like in terms of like a gangster scene in a movie ever.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, but you can also see why Fred's story was the way that it was, and then you step into Pete's story, and already you've got colorful, kind of Pulp Fiction-y, eccentric characters doing exciting, outlandish things, you know, to kind of provide that
I
contrast.
almost wonder if Lynch was influenced by Pulp Fiction at this
Well,
time.
funny you say that, because I actually thought the opposite with when I saw Wild at Heart, which came out in 1990. I was like, okay, Tarantino has got to have seen this movie, because his scripts, the scripts for True Romance and Natural Born Killers, neither of which he ended up directing, but he wrote the original scripts for them and sold them. But I was like, okay, Tarantino has got to have seen Wild at Heart, because there are so many parallels to both of those stories. So it's quite possible that it could have perhaps gone the other way a little bit later. But I do think there is at least something of a connection there.
And it's possible it's cycled back around, much like this movie, into Lynch with this a little bit too. Because there are moments where it feels like it could have been a Pulp Fiction-y type movie. If Quentin had written the script for this, it probably wouldn't even need as much cut out of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, but but that is why in Pete's story in particular, that's why structurally it is more in line with classic film noir and classic Pulp Fiction and classic murder mysteries and crime movies and things like that.
It's got that flavor for sure.
Definitely.
It dances between that and being like a gangster movie, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
With that little David Lynchian, like weird suburban sort of.
Yeah.
Not to. I mean, Edward Scissorhands vibe that I almost get from their house, where it's like, this kid shouldn't be
too
involved
perfect.
in this stuff.
Well, the scene that we're not touching on, that is important, to me anyway, as far as bridging the two stories, is the scene in the hotel with Pete, not Fred yet, but Pete, when he goes into the one room and he sees Alice having sex with some person that we can't see, but it's in that blinding light. And she's like, "Didn't you ever think to ask me why?" And that really is just like that voice in his head that's just torturing him about his, you know, because I think all of us, I know for me personally, I've had that kind of thing happen to me in my head, where like I'll be remembering something from the past and it'll just not leave my head, and you know, I keep replaying the incident in my head, and it can be very tormenting. And I think that scene it captures that emotion really, really well.
Yeah, for sure.
But like that's a pretty key scene, because again, that helps to bridge the two. Now,
is that
Jake,
the one where he rounds the corner and it almost looks like he's going into that like red curtain room from Twin Peaks or whatever?
Sort of. I mean, it's like that plus like the refrigerator from Ghostbusters.
I thought for sure the log lady was going to be in there or some shit. But
yeah. Jake,
sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, you were going to say something.
Was I?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There was something a couple minutes ago, and then I think I had wandered off. I think what I was going to say. We were talking about like influences, or what appear to be influences, and feedback back and forth between Lynch, Tarantino, and other similar directors. One thing that I think is similar between the two is that violence in their films tends to be brief and often shocking, but it's not like dwelled on typically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's purposeful.
It's purposeful, yes, but it's like, and again, this is something that the part where Andy goes headlong into the table.
Yeah.
I didn't particularly like looking at that screen for about 30 seconds there. But
it's the nonchalantness of it that helps it be so shocking
too. It's so out of nowhere. It's so brief. And then of course when he hits him with the statue in the first place, and then it's like just the way he hits him, the wounds that are there, it's almost funny. It's just but yes, that's something the two of them definitely have in common, and
Yeah. Well, and
I
I know
I
that
appreciate that.
and
Yeah.
Tarantino said that prior to Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which is when
Mhm.
he sort of got off the David Lynch train,
Mhm.
but like prior to that, he was like, I loved him. You know, he like because he clearly loved Blue Velvet, he loved Wild at
Mhm.
Heart. You know, clearly
Mhm.
took inspiration from those. So yeah, there is a connection there, but so, I mean, we've definitely covered aspects of characterization. We've covered the plot in its Mobius strip orientation and zigzagging and all that kind of stuff and looping back on itself. Um, and we definitely covered themes and scenes and that kind of stuff.
I haven't said my favorite scene.
Well, we're not favorite scenes. We'll get there, but like just scenes in general. We will do favorites though. But the other big realm of this film is music.
Well,
Now
before
this
we get to that, and this will be a
yeah,
brief mention, I promise.
go for it.
It's important to point out, I think, that both ends of Lost Highway, done by other people as just movies independent of each other, would have been rad. You know, the whole thing they set up at the beginning of this couple where this dude thinks his wife's cheating on him, and at the same time they got somebody sneaking into their house, like videotaping them. That's like a rad setup for some, you know, home invasion movie where they actually bond despite their, you know,
Uh-huh.
unfortunate circumstances or whatever. And then the whole end of it with, you know, the other
With
kid
the
and like the gangster elements and all that. That would have, it could be two separate movies done by
Yeah.
other
yeah,
people that would be
which I
just as
mean,
awesome
I
with
thought
the
it was.
same cast and everything, you know.
well, I mean, in a way, they kind of have been because the whole thing with Pete is very similar to something like Pulp Fiction,
Yeah, that could have
or
easily
could
been
or
that type of movie on its own with the same
yeah.
cast and everything, better
Well,
script, and
and
it would have
then the
been
bit with
awesome.
the bit with Fred and Renee in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's not that dissimilar to the first Purge movie,
Yeah,
actually.
it could have been bone chilling. I would have loved to have seen Bill Pullman, even with his boy lips, like doing something like that. It would have been
Yeah.
fantastic.
But I do like the fact that the two stories, the ways that they intersect and the ways that they compare and
Oh
contrast with
yeah,
each
yeah.
other.
I'm not trying to take anything away from the movie as it is. I'm just saying, like, it is important to note. I think that there's
Yeah.
two really good ideas for decent
Yeah.
fucking movies, like
And
even inside of it.
I'm pointing out that they have been done before and since then in some form or fashion. But yeah, I
Not
think
by
if
David
anything,
Lynch.
not by David Lynch, but I don't think they would be. And if they were to be done that way, then they would end up like they ended up, you know, because he doesn't do
Maybe.
anything the typical way. But that's why we love him. But yeah, the other big realm of this film is the soundtrack. So the soundtrack was
Bangs.
well,
It's awesome.
so Angelo Badalamenti was on the score, which is typical
Right.
because he's done the music for almost all of David Lynch's films.
Right.
But the actual soundtrack album itself was produced by Trent Reznor when he was
Hmm.
he hadn't really progressed into film scoring formally yet, but he was in the business of producing soundtrack albums through Nothing Records, which was his vanity label.
Yes.
And so he had produced the soundtrack to Natural Born Killers, which is also a great film and a great soundtrack, and this, which allowed for him to have some original songs on here, and Natural Born Killers as well, and to also feature some other artists like Marilyn
You
Manson
got Marilyn Manson,
was
yeah.
under
You got
his wing at the time, and then the Smashing Pumpkins, Rammstein.
it's solid. It's one that I would have liked to have owned, like
Yeah.
the soundtrack of
Right.
back in the day.
And
I had
do.
the soundtrack at one point in time.
Yeah, I bought it used from a used CD store, and I listened to it over and over and over and over and over again. One of my favorite soundtracks from a movie, actually.
Dude, and
I
the
would
That's
use
a
not have
of
great
the
wanted.
pop
soundtrack.
music.
I
The
would
use
not
of
have
the
wanted it back in the day, but now I'm thinking it would be pretty cool.
Oh, I have it. I have it, and it's incredible. And the ordering of the songs is an experience in and of itself. I love the way that Trent Reznor would produce a soundtrack album back in the day because of not just the ordering of the songs, but also like you would hear snippets of dialogue, you would hear sound effects,
Yeah.
you would hear
Right.
all these things that made the experience of listening to the soundtrack kind of an extension of the story and in audio form. And I thought that was awesome.
Well, and the use of the songs in the movie is pretty impeccable as well.
It
Like,
really
it's not,
is.
they're not just shoehorned in. They're not just all of us. I mean, we've all learned from Suicide Squad, the first one, that like, you know, just putting pop music in there isn't necessarily.
The
Well,
second
great
one
idea,
made
you know?
masterful use of the soundtrack.
Yeah,
but
it did.
I would
This was
say
great, where he's like attacking that dude and then he throws him in the fucking trunk. Like, that's such an
Yeah.
awesome use of that Rammstein song, you know?
Yeah.
I would say generally speaking, I would say David Lynch films would be solid contenders for use of music in film. This is one of the better ones I've heard.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, now what I think's really cool about this film in comparison to other David Lynch films in both the visual and audio departments. So this film has, if you notice, like in those beginning scenes with Fred and Renee, yeah, they do speak softly, but what you do hear a lot is some of that ambient tone in the room, which is so atmospheric and oppressive and pretty eerie, which reminds me of Eraserhead. And then you also the visual component of this film. There's a lot of black space and a lot of yellows in the interior lighting and that kind of stuff. So again, very eerie, very different from some of his other work. You still have some of the lamp lighting that you see from his other work that's in here.
Well, and even the outdoor stuff looks like a badass, like crispy sitcom vibe, but also film, you know, like David Lynch has a knack for fucking him and whoever his DP is on any given thing. Yeah, has a knack for dialing that in a lot of the time. Where it's like, holy shit, this looks like the Wonder Years on crack, you know.
But what's so interesting though, in both the visual and the audio realm for his other work, most of his other work in comparison to this, most of his other work is very influenced by like 50s Americana, but like a dark side of it, especially like Blue Velvet and even Mulholland Drive.
Right.
This to me feels more contemporary for the late 90s in terms of its look. Now there are some elements that do harken back to the 40s, like with the hairstyles of Patricia Arquette and the fact that it draws on classic film noir and Pulp Fiction and that kind of stuff, which is very 40s. But for the most part, it looks a little bit more contemporary, and the music is very contemporary for its time, and yet you never feel like the soundtrack is just kind of shoehorned in, like, oh, we got to get popular, you know, people on this thing. They use strategic parts, like they don't use like the entire Tammy's got to go.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
But the
thanks for having me, guys. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
What's really great about the soundtrack for this is they use like the right pieces of like Rammstein songs, like so that you hear the beginning part of Hayata Mish, you know, you hear that.
Yeah, it's very well placed.
But you don't hear the whole thing. But then like with the self-titled track for the Rammstein track,
then it opens up and he's like stuffing that motherfucker in there.
Yeah, you hear all the right pieces of it, or even like Apple of Sodom by Marilyn Manson. You hear that when you see the bugs in the light bulb and everything.
It looks like a music, like a really well shot music video of the time.
Yeah, and the like you hear the perfect drug in the right spots, and you know, even some of the little things like some of the Barry Adamson tracks and the you know, and of course Angelo Badalamenti's score, which is always great. But I really love Red Bats with Teeth as a piece because it's a great jazz piece, and then it just goes completely off the rails, which is just like
it gets grating and insane, but that's the point, you know.
Exactly. But yeah, I just wanted to cover off music there.
I love the soundtrack.
Me too.
Right.
It's well worth it. And of course, I'm Deranged is the perfect beginning
Oh
and
yeah.
beginning and ending theme to
Well, and
this.
even the score is well done and well used. It's just there's parts where it's like, I mean, it's like he's looking at a sailboat in a kiddie pool. You know,
Well, but I
Right.
love that piece though. It's Antonio Carlos Jobim for that particular piece of music, which is why can I not remember the name? Insensatas is the track, and of course This Magic Moment by Lou Reed. Excellent.
I did like that rendition.
I mean, I think that, again, I keep circling back around to it, much as the nature of the film itself. But you know, this movie, I think, is like if you're into filmmaking and you watch this, I imagine it's like orgasmic in a lot of it because it's just so well put together, even when there's nothing fucking happening. You know, I think its length just works against it. You know,
yeah,
even
and again, this is not. And this is not an everybody kind of movie, and I fully acknowledge that. And I have to also shout out that by the Smashing Pumpkins, one of my favorite Smashing Pumpkins tracks, very atmospheric. But
the soundtrack's a banger. Like I said, that's what's one I would have loved to have owned back then.
Yeah,
I'm sure
and you can find it, I think, fairly easily on Amazon or eBay or whatever.
And that's really the conundrum with this. Like, even if you don't get it, it's undeniably a well-made movie.
Yeah,
it's got a good cast. It's the thing that's working against it is its length and the fact that the script probably could have used a once over.
Yeah. And I think there's more people my age that tend to get it, you know, or say, "Whoa, this movie was a trip," and I'm looking at them like, okay, yeah, it's trippy, but I didn't get it the first time.
But again, with David Lynch, usually, even if you don't necessarily get all of it right away, hopefully the ride was at least memorable.
Oh, for sure, you can't take that away from it.
And
definitely memorable.
Speaking of which, what were our favorite scenes?
Oh boy! I mean,
we liked
the default one, of course, was Mr. Eddie. But you know, if I had to pick favorite scenes outside of that, there was something about that fucking cabin like exploding in reverse, and they showed it 2 or 3 times in that movie, and it was just like, no wonder, because that is fucking breathtaking, bro. Like I would have showed it 2 or 3 times. In terms of actual scenes, I don't know, man. I'm really partial to the whole sequence where they're actually robbing the dude, and then she points the gun at him, and he's like skeptical of her for a moment, and then she gives it to him, and he's still, you know, like, I don't know about this. I mean, that chick really, well, Patricia Arquette, that chick, like, we don't know her. Patricia Arquette does a good job of playing her role. I think that she's like, obviously, because she is maybe the most consistent part of the movie, is easy to overlook, but I think that she does a really good job of very subtly playing that girl you could fall in love with, but then that would make you want to kill her. You know?
I could easily overlook her in this. I could look over her, but not
you can't overlook her. I'm talking about her performance, though.
Yeah, but no,
like,
but you are right though. She's playing that kind of person that would be alluring, but you might want to kill her if you were to be exposed to those kinds of shenanigans for too long.
Yeah, you could see her manipulating you, and I'd have fallen for it like line and sinker, because it's goddamn. Did you see her walking into that cabin? Of course I'm gonna fall for it. But she does a really good job of playing it subtly. I think her performance is one of the better ones in the movie.
Yeah,
and you know, a lot of people I think would be more inclined to hand that out to other more obvious choices, and they'd be right. And that's the thing, even the performances are great in this. It's just the script is like lacking because it's more of an idea than it is a fully fleshed out movie in the sense that a normal movie is. It's definitely a David Lynch thing.
Yeah, it's you can't judge it by other movie standards, I don't think, because it's not built that way.
But yeah, I guess that scene, or just, you know, obviously, you know, going for pure like effects, the whole scene where he's like tearing himself out of his skin, or the part where the dude's like head is
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, once you have like kids, that's how you see the corner of every coffee table for
I'm
the
sure.
first couple of years. It's like that's what's gonna happen to them. Keep them away from it.
Yeah.
Fucking...
Well, I'll make it super easy. My favorite's the "We've Met Before, Haven't We?" The first scene with the mystery man. I think that's just that whole scene is just it. Even people that wouldn't like the movie necessarily, they tend to universally be like, "Oh, that scene that gets
It's
me."
creepy.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yes, it is. And I agree. I really like that scene. And I did like the road rage scene as well.
Yeah, that's
And I
funny.
think those two might be the favorite ones overall.
They're definitely standout moments for sure.
What about you, Brandon?
One point I wanted to return to, I'd started to make, but then it got lost in the shuffle, so I wasn't able to quite get back to
It
it.
got lost on the highway.
Was there were three things that I looked at for people watching a David Lynch film. One of which, a person watching it is dissecting all of the amazing directing and artistic points and wants to keep analyzing it again and again. The other way is somebody who likes to get lost in the chaos and eventually let it bring order with repeated viewings. And others get lost and kind of check out. And I'll admit, I was in that third category the first viewing for me. But with that point made, I did like the part with the party with the guy, kind of creepy guy, talking about I'm in your house here
Yeah.
and handing him the cell phone.
And I I like the bit with Andy right after that, where he's like, I don't know who he is. I think he was a friend of Dick Laurent's. Well, Dick Laurent's dead. What do you mean? Who told you he was dead? You know, that whole thing. That's a really cool scene because
Yeah.
again it makes
Little
more sense when
foreshadowing.
it makes it more sense when you look at it kind of through the chronology of events that we mentioned, where I think he probably killed Dick Laurent first before killing Alice. Or Renee, excuse me. Kroll, did you have a favorite scene?
Yeah, I mean, I had a few. Definitely, meeting the mysterious guy was definitely a great scene. I really like the fight scene, and when he kills the guy, going to the coffee table.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was just pretty epic. Speaking of coffee tables, I actually had an accident on a coffee table during the blizzard of '78. I was 3, and
I don't know why
I
that's so
smashed my
funny.
head.
The blizzard of
And got a
'78.
huge, thing on my head, and I had to be rushed to the hospital from the National Guard because the ambulance couldn't even get through. And my father actually picked me up because he was in the National Guard, and he rushed me to the hospital. So just wanted to point that out. We're talking
It can
about
happen.
Yeah.
But your
So,
head wasn't
Actually-
impaled halfway onto it. So that's
No,
but in your mind,
that's
as
a
parent,
whole
when you
other
see your
thing.
kid running around him, like that's what's gonna happen for sure.
Yeah.
I
So,
tell you, now that you mention that, it reminds me of one of the funnier things I thought growing up was like my idiot brother managed to fall and hit his head on the table in 2 different times in 2 different ways, so that he actually had scars like an X on his forehead, and it faded as he got older. But yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, same
I
thing.
have
My
to
brother
second
was
you,
always
Carl.
fucking himself up like that. I wasn't one of those kids.
I have to second you, Crawl, on that crashing his face into that glass table. That was kind of priceless.
yeah.
The whole way the edge of that table just looked like if it would have gone a little bit further, it would have lopped his other half off.
That
Right.
would be cool.
Right.
But
True.
I enjoyed the Mr. Ed tailgating scene. The way he and his mob dudes just kind of stomped the shit out of that dude, and
It was a
read
good scene.
his rules and his rights of the road.
I'm laughing at that scene because they're gangsters and they're holding guns on him and they're all talking about law, and it's like, well, you guys are breaking the law. But
Yeah, but they're not breaking laws that just affect regular people on the streets. You know what I mean? Like traffic laws are important, so I respect that logic. I really like how like there's so many different little comedic things about that whole sequence that are different to the rest of the movie. But I think it's when he mentions the horsepower, or if he asks if that dude's doing what he thinks he's doing, where the dudes look out the back window and then they immediately put on their seatbelts like they know what's
that's great.
Yeah,
that's good stuff.
Well, and I like when he's even testing the car. He's like smooth as shit from a duck's ass.
yeah, that's a great line.
One final little thing I wanted to throw in here. So we talked about this being kind of final performances from Richard Pryor and from Robert Blake. This was also kind of conversely, it was also Marilyn Manson and Twiggy Ramirez's feature film debuts as actors, because they make cameos in the porn footage that's in the latter part of the film.
Doesn't Manson get his dick bitten off? That's the way I read this.
No, but he kind of has a seizure, from what I could see.
Okay.
But it's I just thought that was interesting. Kind of, two going in.
It was neat.
Two going in, two going out.
Well, there was that moment where I was seeing it, and I was like, maybe that's like a little too on the nose. But then I also am a fan of that era of Manson, so I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
In the also in the interest of cyclical kind of stuff, or the one thing that I found interesting going through the notes on the film here on IMDb, Dane, we've got this as one of your birthday picks, but the film was actually released on my birthday.
Hey,
so I find that kind of fun. I was like, oh, isn't that something? I wish I could go see a David Lynch movie on my birthday. But I wouldn't have even. I don't even know I knew who he was when this film came out.
Yeah. And I was way too young to be thinking about that stuff when this.
It's just come out. Comforting knowing that Mr. Eddie was pistol whipping that fool on your birthday.
I know.
Yes. He was out there doing a public service announcement.
Yes. We can all sleep a little better at night knowing that Mr. Eddie's on the case.
Keeping those roads safe. That's what I'm about. That.
And take a bite out of crime. Oh, wait.
The American opening weekend was that weekend. It apparently opened a month earlier in France. But anyway.
Because it was partially a French co-production because of Studio Canal. And
right.
I think the biggest thing I just would throw out there about this is kind of what I told Carl at the beginning, which is that don't let this paint your view of like other David Lynch stuff. There is shit that's a lot more accessible. This is meant to be watched as like a fun experiment in, I guess, filmmaking. I couldn't even say writing because there's not enough of that in there for that to be a thing. But it definitely is like worth watching if you're into movies.
It's Sibi 2000 rather than Studio Canal. My apologies, but still a French co-production. But so your birthday.
I'd say this is like minimum 3 watches. Yeah, most of you.
I definitely think I might say it again.
I was attracted to it because of the soundtrack and because of I was really getting into Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson.
Well. Hearing the O.J. Simpson part of it, it kind of brings it.
That adds an interesting element.
Yeah. Well, it helps to psychologically get you in the headspace, especially
grounded.
Especially if you've read "If I Did It," which if you haven't, I would highly recommend you do it, because it does help to get you in this person's psyche and in the psyche of someone that could do this, and the mental gymnastics that one would have to go through in order to get there. And then of course you filter it through David Lynch's brain, and here you go,
which is basically an ashtray on Mars with a bunch of acid in it,
and Patricia Arquette.
And Patricia Arquette, thank God.
Yeah.
So
Wait,
wasn't that Slaughterhouse-5? No, just kidding.
But glad that everyone got to at least see it. I know it had been on people's list for a while.
Oh, it's
Alrighty.
good. I'm happy to have revisited it, man. It's a bit of a conundrum, even as someone into movies, but it's an experience everyone should have.
Let's go around and see what everyone's outros is. Let's start with you, Krull. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I'm 48, so not too young. Been watching movies my whole life. More, I don't know, I guess more action movies and comedies are my thing. I watched a lot of dramas when I was young and a lot of older classic movies when I was younger, and I really enjoyed them too. I like all kinds of genre. I'm not huge on horror, except I love monsters, especially love vampires. Some of the other stuff like Saw and stuff like that, I'm not into at all. I do like ghost movies for horror. I like romantic movies, all kinds of movies. I don't do anything at the moment. I had a stroke 10 years ago, so disabled, and so basically play games. That's what I do. And watch TV and movies. What was that?
Krull hangs out with me. That's what he contributes to the world.
I gotta keep you keep you kind of sane.
Mo, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, my name is Mo. I do a channel called Drunken Master Studios where I mostly cover full moon stuff anymore. I used to cover a lot more shit, and we're going to be getting back to that in coming months. But right now I'm focusing on the full moon content. We got a lot of cool stuff we recently did. FanFest collab video that featured two of the people in this room right now. So definitely get on over there and check that out. We got some cool pickups we're going to be showing off here soon, as well as some announcements of things coming to the show. So all that's going on as well. And hopefully end of the month, I'll have some Puppet Master replicas to show you guys. So lots of cool things going on.
Alrighty. Going over to you, Dane. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm Dane Kyle. I'm a independent filmmaker and I guess now film educator out of Charlotte, North Carolina. My recently rebranded YouTube channel is Dangerous Arts, DANEJUROUS, Dangerous Arts. And my latest YouTube series is called Oztober, where 31 days, 31 different Oz-related film or TV adaptations all throughout the month of October. And you'll have to stay tuned for what my birthday pick is on the 21st. Something pretty important for me in terms of Oz adaptations, but yeah, I'm glad to have made that series, and hopefully there'll be more cool deep dives like that in the near future. And I do want to also just get back into more formal filmmaking again. It's been too long. The pandemic kind of threw a monkey wrench into a lot of those plans for a while.
Okay. Going over to you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
SeptumSin is SeptumSin versus the world. We cover physical media, so if you like that sort of thing, just come join us. We have a little bit left on Inside Movies Galore for Halloween, but we're gonna end it out with the original feature-length version of Frankenstein, the Universal Monsters film that really started a cascading film fun. And that's all I got for you.
Alrighty. How about you, Jake? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. You're muted, Mike. You're muted, Jake, if you're trying to speak.
All right, I am Kotobukijake, and I apparently was trying to communicate psychically with you all, and it didn't work. So I'm going to try the old-fashioned way. So I'm the co-host on SeptumSin versus the World, which we, as I think he said, it's getting late and I'm fading in and out, but we do fun stuff there. We do pick up videos and reviews and fun stuff. And coming up next week, we have a discussion, our anime anticlimax discussion on Psychopaths, which will be pretty cool. Look forward to that. And actually, if I remember correctly, I think it's my choice next month. And Dane, you have influenced said choice with tonight's picks. So I look forward to properly presenting that soon. I am a fan generally, not just anime, but generally movies, music, all kinds of media, and try not only to collect them, but to support them in whatever ways I can. I've actually got a couple of projects on Kickstarter that I'm planning to throw a bit towards. So, and meanwhile, I don't get to watch near as much as I'd like because I'm always working. I've got to still building a business, and that takes a huge chunk of the time, but still like to come on with you fine folks and shoot the breeze for a while about good movies, and yeah, go.
Which I very much enjoy you coming on to Jake. It's one of my pleasures of the nightly, weekly visits we have with each other. So, but my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, where we go on and talk about random films of all genres, and hopefully you enjoy what we have to talk about. We have some cool stuff lined up here. So thank you for listening. But I also have a moonlight under a different channel where I go on about my own video reviews, my own pickup videos. And I also interview directors and filmmakers and actors of all kinds on this channel. So keep a good lookout for some cool interviews in the future. Right now, I'll probably be setting something with a young director by the name of Jeffrey Garcia. So look out for that Thursday. So in any case, like, share, and subscribe, and hopefully you get a chance to check us out and let us know what you thought down here in the comments, whether you've seen the film or whether you thought we were wrong. In any case, thanks for everything and enjoy.
All right, everyone.